All right. So, if I may share first slide. So, who is going to be speaking today, and what you all came for? It's interesting. So, we have a couple of speakers today. The first in a row is Ilya. Ilya, where are you? Ilya is over there at the window. And
it's very slow.
Don't play with the iPad.
It's very slow.
I know you have a new toy, but don't do it. Fisha. Ilya actually built all the new data initiatives at Mall Group, and he was actually in a very interesting situation because Mall Group was formed, with Mall, CZC, and 30 other e-shops that actually Rockaway Group put together, and they had all different systems, all different operations, how they worked, and Ilya was in charge to put it together and redesign.
Oops.
Yeah, that's why it was actually in front, but you're from Vancouver, okay. But so Ilya's gonna share his experiences with his 2 years long journey, which I think are quite actually interesting. Next, we have Pavel from Spoška Erstebank. Pavel is here. Pavel is the main data architect for the Data Tribe, and he's gonna share with us the reasoning why one of the oldest banks in Europe, I guess, right? Or
I'm not sure.
Yeah, but one of the old banks actually decided to change how they work with data. It's not only about reporting and BI, but overall why they decided, what were their thoughts, how does it fit with DataMesh architecture, etc. Then we have my colleague Fisha. He came from Vancouver. At Keboola, he's responsible for implementations, professional services. So he leads the team of professional services. He sees a lot of implementations and on both sides of the pond. So he will kind of like help me and correct me with what we see in real life. And my name is Pavel, and I just put up this meetup together. And together with Peter and Milan, we are three co-founders and owners of Keboola. So let's get to it. We're waiting for Apple. One more, 2, 3. Yay! Good. So just to set up expectations, what are we going to be talking about today? Well, this meetup is not about technology per se. We are not going to be discussing GPUs. We're not going to be discussing how to best train the models. But we're going to be discussing architecture and processes. And I think it's very interesting. Last week, actually, we had a webinar together with ThoughtSpot, and as part of that webinar, I actually conducted a survey where I asked over 500 C-level people around the world from companies like Dropbox, PayPal, VMware, and many others about how they think the C-level people about data. What actually struck me was two things. First, all the C-level people actually think that they should be part of the team that's in charge of data initiatives. So they should be the ones responsible, together with BI departments. This is a huge change. I don't know if you remember, like pre-COVID, this was like not on the C-level agenda. Like, yeah, maybe for Rohlik, yeah, right there, right? It was a little bit different. It was a founder and C-level was like highly actually connected. But that has changed a lot. And second, I asked him like 10 questions, but the second question was, what is your biggest priority now with data? And where are your biggest challenges? I was really surprised. I thought it's going to be, infrastructure, it's going to be different data sources, pipelines, but all of them actually see as the biggest challenge data adoption. And that was like really surprising because like they didn't see it before, So a lot has changed, and there's that old joke, who's responsible for digital transformation at your company? CEO, CIO, or COVID-19, right? So thanks to that year and a half, we actually see the large companies being transformed and changed. Thank you. That was our testing crew. Thank you, by the way. So, this is the data that actually we got from people and we asked them, but still there are those two statistics from Gartner. And yes, thanks. And actually, Gartner, you have all seen this, right? Gartner says that right now over 24% of are you okay? Yeah. Perfect. So 24% of all the spending in infrastructure goes to data infrastructure. And that number is growing. They also say that over 80% of data projects fail. So I was thinking, like, we're discussing why is that? And one of the things that when we talk to you guys is that in large corporations, people still work in waterfall methodology, and they are kind of like not thinking. They are either thinking about process or about how to architect the team or what the best tools to use, but they need to be thinking about all three of them. So,
maybe let me stop you. One question that I had, or a comment regarding of the split of the costs, right, the spending and such. I was just wondering how much is being put for data ops, for operations, for the mundane work, everyday work, maintenance of the data stack. It's not about the investment into data stack, but also in the operation, in the ongoing costs that are kind of like sunken costs, right?
Yeah, that's great thought. Let's hold it. Ask Ilya and Pavel once they are on the stage. Which, by the way, if you have questions and you think something is like shitty or you have, you want to comment on that, don't wait, stop and just shout, right? This is a meetup, not a lecture. So, so we're thinking about three things, right? Process, architecture, and the infrastructure platform, which need to come together. So, last couple of years, next slide, please, Fami. Actually, we've seen several things. So first, people started to talk about the processes. So, data kitchen guys came up with data ops manifesto, how you should kind of like involve all people, how you should be aware. Next slide, please. How you should be aware of, that you need to use different processes for prototyping cycle and production, Agile and Six Sigma. And I think Pavel is going to talk a lot about that, about prototyping/production in the large environment of Česká Bank.
Maybe one fact is that prototyping and fast iterations was one of the main factors that U.S. banks were asking for. That was the main concern that they had when we spoke to them. Usually it was a ready-made environment for data scientists, and the second one was the iterations and the prototyping ability.
Yeah, I actually think that this was like really revolutionary way of thinking for large corporations, and for the first time, people started to think about, hey, first let's use DevOps, like pipelines and processes, but then the guys around data ops manifesto realized that we have more user personas. In the engineering we have developers, right? Okay, they are all very technical. They know how to run CI/CD pipelines, all of that, right? But in the data world, we have more personas. Not only developers, scientists, analysts, data engineers. Now we have analytical engineers. And what else did we see last couple of? Did you see any interesting new personas and titles lately? Yeah, Petře? No. So there's a player for them. Sabbatical data engineer Petr Huňka. Yeah. And but anyhow, it's about process. So prototype, production, great. Different methodologies, Agile versus Six Sigma, etc. But that's just the process. And if you think process, architecture, and infrastructure. So let's get to the next one. It's why we are here today about the architecture. So about a year and a half ago, actually, people around the company ThoughtWorks came up with new buzzword or a new term. They actually invented or described DataMesh. And one of the things that is actually really interesting about that is their focus on the domain knowledge. Next one. And that's really something which has changed, because previously we've seen it at all large companies, right? Fisha, you had a good thing that people were talking more mostly functions?
Basically, the main fabric of a business is the domain itself. But the architecture at the current stage has been architected around the function, right? The functionality, the databases and stuff like that. But this comes into the different notion of architecting everything around domains.
So sorry, it's a little bit abstract for me. When you say functions, you mean like functions?
Let's say data prep, storage, transformations, and streaming, and those kind of like functions.
Okay.
Finance and marketing.
That's a domain.
That's a domain.
Well, is it only domain, even if it's kind of like put together in the waterfall methodology? So typically it would be like, I have idea, right? I have to go to somewhere. They need to go to IT ops. They need to go DevOps, and so that's why I thought when you were talking about functions.
Mm-hmm. No, it's more about the technical side of.
Oh, you mean technical side, right? That's really interesting because
and also teams, and also the teams itself, right? They have the core IT and data engineering analysts and maybe some BI department and other departments, right? But very often you see those departments as a serving departments for the others. But imagine that you have teams, right? There's a mix of people, and then they serve because they actually handle the data as a product, which is one of the point that.
So then it becomes a domain because they are thinking about the same common goal and not they are decoupled from each other in the pipeline. So I actually took the Zalando example when they went from classical data architecture to DataMesh. And they said, they went to decentralized ownership, which is kind of like they put together the teams from different functions like marketing, whatever. And they said the data domain as the first class concern. So, think about, the pipelines, how it's put together and, like wait for each other, but always think about the data and what it should represent for whom. And that's, I think for me, one of the fundamental concepts is to, treat data as the product. Yes, I actually talked to Zdeněk, who was at Slevomat, and then Rohlik was like, I don't really understand. It's like, treat data as a product so everybody can reuse it, right? And I said, well, you are different because, all the Tomáš Tuhor company, it's always been functioning like that because they were functioning as the domains, from the beginning. And they always thought about domains, what they want to do with them, right? But in the large companies, it's really different, right? And as Fisha said, they actually put together cross-functional domain data teams, like people from IT, people from they knew the domain, like market, etc. And they put them together in something which they call quantums. That's a fundamental concept of data mesh architecture. Put people, data, and infrastructure together. So you don't have to, when you want to do something, you either have a technical knowledge, I know how to get the data, or you have a domain knowledge, I know what the data is actually saying, or you have the infrastructure knowledge, I know how to provision you this type of server or whatever, right? But and Lukáš kind of like remembers this. He comes from Tesco originally, right? So it was like Tesco was like in all large companies like this, like divided, right? So the data mesh started to say, hey, let's put this together, and there should be a quantum, which is a team of people that work together. They know the data, so they know the domain. They actually have technical skills, and they have the infrastructure they need, right? So if you think about that, then what they actually do becomes a product. And they say, treat your data as a product. So think about who is going to use it, think about iteration cycles, and think about, how to actually version it and do new releases. And if you do that, it's decoupled from the classical functioning pipeline, and you can reuse it. So reusability is the third kind of like big thing, right?
Maybe one point is also there is a notion of responsibility, right? So the teams are actually responsible for publishing the data or providing the data to the other teams as well, which is super important.
Yeah, and they become clients of each other. So I think that there's our goal with Fisha was just like set up like basic framework. What is like what we're talking about and why it becoming so popular around the world. And I would probably stop here.
Could I pick coffee time?
Yeah. Fisha hates me for this because I always say like when I speak to people like journalists, I say, well, the end goal is that the experience should be as smooth as an espresso, right? And Fisha hates it because he's got like 25 different tools how to prepare coffee. So it's like, please don't put George Clooney again on the screen. So.
I was begging actually.
But this is an ideal world, right? Just like I actually admire Nespresso for how they actually innovated. But that's a different story. But my point is that it should be really pleasant experience for everybody involved, for people who are creating that and for people who are consuming the data, right? But we still have a long way to go, and that's why we are actually here to actually share the experiences. So we'll have Pavel and Ilya sharing their experiences.
And then there will be a discussion afterwards, I guess.
Well, I would say, if you have questions now, which you might just like, let's them now, but if you don't, I would invite, because we were waiting for testing, which I thank you for it. But if
if everything is okay and you don't have burning questions, then I would kind of like invite Pavel first to tell us about his experience at Spočka, and then stop and ask questions during his talk. Is it okay with you? Or do you have burning questions right now? I don't think so, because purpose of the meetup is that we set up some topic and then we can discuss together, not here and there, right? So. Yeah!